good. 30, that's a good number. Let's get started. It's been a little while. It's been a little while since we've had one of these, or at least since I facilitated one of these webinars. So welcome back, everybody. I'm glad to be doing this again. It's been a number of months. Just because it has been a while, just to reintroduce myself, my name is James Sturdy. I'm a registered psychological counselor with the Health Professions Council Board of Psychology. I am in private practice in Durban, KZN. I also consult at Regent Business School. And we have been running a webinar series on a number of these 21st century skills and soft skills and personal development topics, just to try introduce you guys to various different ways of coping and managing life and managing adversity, but also exposing you to different aspects of psychology and different types of the full range of what it means to be a human being and how to cope with challenges. And on that note, we're going to be speaking about resilience today. Is this a topic that you guys have heard of? Is it a word that you've heard of? Has anybody not heard of it? If you've heard of it, maybe just raise your hand. Just give me a bit of a sense of how much it is known. Okay, good. I'm seeing some hands coming up, so it's not a completely new idea. The aim for today will hopefully be just to kind of flesh out the definition of what it means to be resilient, and then also to understand a little bit where does this resilience come from. So what does it mean? Where does it come from? And how do we develop skills around resilience? That's going to be the topic for today. And hopefully by the time we reach the end of this webinar, you'll have some information on that. I will have some time at the end for Q&A as per usual, but if there are any comments or questions as we're going, put them in the chat. I'll be keeping half an eye on it, and you know, some of them I'll engage with, some of them I might keep to the end, but feel free at any point to kind of chip in with the comments. Even if I miss it, other participants can see it. It might get them thinking as well. So it's great just to get interaction and participation going. So feel free to chip in. And also, if you have any questions and you don't want to ask them in the middle, feel free to make a note of them yourself and bring them up towards the end. And we'll have enough time to chat with everyone in that regard. Okay, so let's get going. When we are thinking about resilience, often what we are, you know, the words that come to mind, the associations we have in these ideas of strength and weakness, right? So what does it mean to be strong? What does it mean to be weak? And often we kind of identify or associate resilience with strength. You know, if I'm resilient, it means that I'm strong. And if I lack resilience, it means that I'm weak. And then often we have other associations with these words, right? You know, what does it mean to be strong? Well, maybe the definition of strength is someone who's able to just go through life without being affected by it. Someone who's not affected by adversity, or someone who doesn't show their emotions, whereas someone who's weak might be someone who cries when things are hard, you know, finds it hard to get up out of bed or pinch up, show up at their commitment. So we have these, and I'm not saying, you know, which are right or which is wrong, but we have these associations of what it means to be strong and what it means to be weak. And resilience doesn't quite fit into these concepts. I think it's important to untangle it a little bit, to untangle this idea of resilience from this idea of strength. Because strength can often be a dangerous aspiration, if you put it that way, unless we are speaking about a very specific thing. But often when we're speaking about strength, we're speaking about a type of positioning that can actually be more vulnerable than we realize, and it doesn't always stand up to the tests of a difficult life or difficult period in life. This need to be strong all the time. And we often put a lot of pressure on the people around us to be strong, and people put a lot of pressure on us to be strong. You know, when you're grieving, for example, people will say, you know, just be strong. You're going through a breakup, people say, be strong. And we're often left wondering, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm not allowed to say how I'm feeling? Does it mean I'm not allowed to turn to you? Am I meant to just pretend that everything's fine, even though it's not? It can be quite a confusing, counsel. So being able to separate this idea of resilience from strength and weakness is very important, because with strength there's often rigidity. So rigidity means things that are very kind of, you know, set, firm. So rigid beliefs that we have. This is how life is meant to work, or this is how people are meant to treat me, or this is how this is how I'm meant to interact with certain concepts in my life, be it failure or success. This is how I think about it. There's a kind of rigidity, it doesn't change very much. The permissions we set for ourselves, they can be very concrete, calcified. And that's often what we think about strong. I have these values and I have these expectations and I have these beliefs and I have these permissions that I set for myself, and they're very kind of set in stone. The problem with rigidity, though, is that it tends to break under extreme stress. So it might be fine when you go through the normal garden variety stress of life, where as that stress starts to build up and we start to get tested in ways that perhaps we haven't been in different ways, that rigidity can then actually break if it's not allowed to bend. And this is something that engineers are very aware of. That the strongest structures are when you think of bridges and tall buildings, they are expected to have movement. There's kind of the expectation of movement built into them. So bridges are built with these links that are joined together as opposed to one span, because that allows a bit more stress to be applied on the structure. So I'm not a civil engineer, but just to kind of give a bit of insight into how that is also. It's also similar to this idea of emotional rigidity and the life stress that we get under. Is if we're very kind of set in our ways and very rigid and not willing to change our beliefs, the stress can then put significant pressure on those and on ourselves to the point where it actually becomes unsustainable and we start to break down. So this introduces the concept of anti-fragility, to be fragile is to break easily. And sometimes even something that doesn't break easily, when it's under a lot of stress, it can shatter. So anti-fragility is some way of being that can kind of cope with the punches of life, but in a very honest, authentic way that builds this idea of resilience. So if we speak about resilience, we're speaking about bounce back ability. So the ability to bounce back from setbacks, that is a key component of resilience, bounce back ability. The ability to adapt to changing situations, and also to be able to actually not just survive through adversity, but to thrive through it, to come out the other side better for it. Withstanding and recovering from adversities, this is what I call the scatter cushion advantage. And the reason I call it that is, again, it's challenging these ideas of strength. So you can do this thought experiment. Right now I'm up on the third floor of my building, and I'm looking out my window, and I can see the Indian Ocean, and I can see down to the road. It's quite a drop. It's not the type of drop that a human being would probably be able to survive. You can imagine this thought experiment. If I was to throw two things out this window, what would happen to them? So number one, you think of a desk. A desk, as I'm hitting my desk right now, it's really solid. And you can imagine a cushion, scattered cushion on my couch behind me. If I was to ask you beforehand which one of those is stronger, which one do you kind of conceive to be stronger, normally you're going to say that the desk, right? It's harder. You would not want to hit your head on it. You wouldn't want to fall on it. There's rigidity to it. So you think about that in terms of strength. But if I was to throw it out this window in front of me, what would happen? Hit the street below and shatter into 1,000 pieces, right? So that strength actually starts to become a disadvantage to the desk. Whereas a scatter cushion, or any type of cushion, you throw it out the window, it'll float down, it would land, you might have to dust it off, but it would be pretty much the same as before. But this is challenging this idea of how strength can always be advantageous, and sometimes we need a bit more of a sophisticated definition of resilience, not just about this being a rock all the time, because rocks under enough stress crack quite spectacularly. So resilience is about mental toughness as well, the ability to be tough in the face of adversity. And toughness, again, is a slightly different concept of strength. To be able to be tough doesn't mean you're necessarily strong on the outside or in any type of self-delusion, but rather the ability to continue showing up, or know when you know how to show up when life is getting hard. Emotional intelligence, key component of resilience, to be able to regulate our own feelings, to understand our own feelings, to regulate our behavior, to find motivation in difficult times when the chip's down, and to be able to manage our relationships and understand emotions in other people. And then problem-solving skills as well, key part of resilience. If we have the ability to look at the problem that is causing us significant stress and have perspective on it and have creative solutions to that problem, that also increases our overall resilience and our ability to bounce back as we are going through difficulties. And so this overall resistance offers a kind of protection, resistance from stress. It doesn't mean we don't experience stress, but it provides some buffer from it, but also an ability to experience it over longer periods of time more sustainably. The short-term strategies that are sometimes more about avoidance, denial, they can get us through the difficult times, and sometimes it's necessary to just compartmentalize and not really deal with what we're going through, because it might just be too much for us at that point. There's no one size fits all approach. Sometimes that is the best thing to do. Sometimes it's the most appropriate thing to do, but that tends to be a short-term solution. And if we're not actually dealing with things, we're not actually feeling the full extent of our emotional reaction to a situation, then we are more likely to start developing the symptoms of chronic, of being under chronic stress, and all of the kind of health complaints and dangers and mental health consequences of that. So resilience offers us some protection and some resistance over time from either acute or chronic stress. But resilience is not just about bounce back ability. So it is about bounce back ability, but it's not just about bounce back ability, which means bounce back ability is, you imagine a stress ball. So you squeeze the stress ball in your hand and it kind of completely loses its shape, and you let go and it goes back to exactly the way it was before, right? That's bounce back ability. So it went through a really stressful experience, you let it go and it kind of was the same as it was before. That might be one of the goals that we might have when we go through hardship. We say, well, I just want to kind of come out the other side and be me again. That's a very understandable goal. It's a very worthwhile goal. But there's something perhaps even greater than that, which is to say, well, what if I was able to go through a stressful situation? What if I was able to go through hardship and not just be me at the end of it, but be a more developed version of me? What if I came out the other side of this really difficult experience wiser for it, and kinder for it, more passionate, empathetic, and more understanding, more insightful into life, more grateful for what I have, for the things that matter in my life? That's not me just bouncing back to the way I was before. That's me actually growing through this trauma. And this is the concept of post-traumatic growth. So we often talk about post-traumatic stress, right? Real thing. Post-traumatic growth is once we've gone through the trauma and gone through the post-traumatic stress, we actually have the ability to grow through trauma. But it's not inevitable. It's not something that just happens by itself. We often have to rearrange the pieces in such a way to allow growth to happen. And those pieces might be mental, they might be our mindset, our expectations, our beliefs. They might be the behaviors that we are using as well to deal with the trauma. So yeah, not just about returning to your original state, it's about finding the opportunities for growth. So remaining unchanged is not as worthwhile a goal, perhaps, as growing through hardship. So what can look different on? We can have a different self-image. We can define ourselves in different ways. So we have these narratives that we tell ourselves about who we are, right? The person that I am, and the things that are important to me. And then we go through trauma, we go through adversity, we go through setbacks, we go through failures, and we come out the other side. And actually that self-image, the story about ourselves has changed, perhaps for the better. We realize things about ourselves that we didn't before. I'm actually able to put up with them. I can cope with really difficult situations. And maybe another development in terms of that self-image is I can allow myself to feel. I can trust myself to feel the difficult things when I'm going through difficult times, and I don't break. I'm able to carry on. And in fact, it makes me more capable. So I'm actually able to regulate my feelings in these difficult times. I don't have to believe they don't exist. That's a new self-image, or a revised self-image that can come through adversity as well. Relationships. These are something, when we go through difficulty, we often have a kind of a new sense for how important relationships can be. If I'm not sure, it's hard to see the faces that are in front of me right now. It depends where you guys are in your life. But what starts to happen, when you leave school, you kind of, you leave some friendships behind just out of practicality, also out of growth. People move away, but also we move internally, right? We become different people. We start to figure out what's important to us. Our priority change, some people's values we realize are incompatible. But there's an evolution that happens there in relationships. We start to settle into ourselves, settle into our adult relationships, and sometimes that means bringing along our relationship before. But then you get into your 30s and your 40s, and your friends start getting divorced, and relationships break down, and that can, that's a different type of existential realizations that come through that. As people that are important to you, suddenly they're not together anymore, and you have to figure out what to do with all of that. It can really make you think more about relationships that perhaps you take for granted. And any type of adversity can do that. You realize who you can lean on. You realize who's good for what, and not everyone has to be good for everything in terms of support. Right? We can't expect one person to fulfill all the things we need from a person. But we start to realize as we go through difficult times, these people were really able to be there in this way, or these people were able to be there in that way, whether it's bringing a meal or being a shoulder to cry on. We have clarity in these relationships, and we learn that this person, perhaps they didn't have the space in their life for me, and that's okay. But I know that's clarified that relationship. And the relationships where we have been able to grow through it, these are enriched through the trauma. And as we touched on in other webinars in terms of wellness, having meaningful and deep relationships is such an important part of being well and living a life that feels full. Also, altered priorities. So what really matters? This is something that hardship can put into very clear focus. What matters? The things that I thought that mattered before maybe don't matter as much as I thought they did. So having the newest pair of shoes, maybe that felt like the most important thing. After I've lost this significant person in my life, that just feels like it couldn't matter at all, because nice to have, but that doesn't actually, that's not the important thing. So our priorities evolve as we are forced to change our perspective through hardship and grief and loss and trauma and all of these inevitable display. So resilience has a lot of benefits. The capacity to be resilient has a lot of benefits for our mental health, also for our physical health. So it's not just about the psychological benefit of it. I hope already you're starting to get an idea of how having the ability to be resilient and bounce back and to grow, to be flexible when we need to be, how these have psychological benefits in managing stress. But there's also physiological responses that our bodies have been demonstrated to get through the capacity to be resilient. So by physiological, I just mean there are health benefits to that as well. Stress hormones tend to be lower. They tend to be lower in individuals who show more resilience. The stress hormones like cortisol, the adrenal part of your adrenal system, things like adrenaline and norepinephrine. Also, these are more regulated. So it's a more efficient stress response. We're not just overwhelmed by that autonomic arousal that can happen when you're going through trauma, but rather the ability to regulate in healthy ways. That comes down to this emotional regulation. We can have the ability to have helpful cognitive structures, which is to say helpful ways that we think about the stress that we're going through, can down-regulate the emotions we're feeling and can down-regulate our body's response to that stress. And that has lots of really powerful implications for your health as well. Because if you are constantly under this stress response in terms of chronic stress, you're much more likely to have lower immune system, more risk of stress-related illness. And if you have lower stress, or better ability to regulate that stress through something like resilience, you have the opposite, a stronger immune system and lower risk of stress-related. Resilient individuals also tend to use healthy coping mechanisms to build their resilience, the ability to withstand stress. Things like exercise and sleep and relaxation techniques, overall contributions to well-being. These are things that resilient people are able to bring online when they're going through difficult times. So the challenge with adversity and stress generally is that when we're going through it, we tend to put down the things that we need to do in order to feel okay. Such as sleeping well, such as eating well, such as exercising, such as using our support system, but just still finding the joy in life and pitching up for the things that we need in order to top up our tank. When we're feeling overwhelmed, we tend to go into survival mode. We shut down everything, we stop exercising, we sleep terribly, we eat terribly, We shut people out. We don't tell anyone how we're really feeling. And so our mental health deteriorates as a result, especially in the time when we really need those things in order to help us get through it. So an individual who's resilient can find a way of keeping those healthy coping mechanisms online through difficult times. Okay, I hope this is making sense. As I said, any questions, please throw them into the comments or make a note of them for later. So this then brings us to resilience training, or how do we develop resilience within ourselves? And you can do that right now, based on just the first 25 minutes I've spent talking about this. You might be getting a sense for your own levels of resilience. How resilient do you feel that you are? Might differ over time, might differ in terms of different stresses, but typically speaking, if you were to ask yourself right now, how would I rate my own resilience? Do I feel really resilient, or do I feel quite fragile? Do I feel like the next thing that comes in life might just be the one that knocks me off my feet and I'm really petrified of it? How resilient do you feel? You can ask yourself that question. That then points to the gaps. And the good thing about resilience is that it can be developed. You're not just born with it. In order to understand that, you have to understand where does it come from. Right? So what is it? What are the factors that lead to a person either being resilient or not? And this is a complicated, combination of nature and nurture, and your genes and your environment. That's not completely understood, but it is understood. Like with most things, probably both. One of the most helpful conceptual sayings there is, nurture loads the gun. No, nature loads the gun, nurture pulls the trigger. So nature loads the gun, nurture pulls the trigger. So nature, our genes kind of set us up for certain, whatever it is, whether it's our height or our intelligence, our ability to be introverts, extroverts, whatever it might be, whatever traits they are, but it's our environment that then kind of either brings them on. You might have the genes for being a really fit, strong person, but if your nutrition is terrible in the early years of your life, you might never reach those potentials. And it's the same with resilience. There's naturally going to be some type of genetic component that might set the stage, but it's really the environment that's going to shape that and decide that, bring your resilience to what it might be. And there's research that shows early adversity can be quite good for developing resilience. If you experience setbacks quite early in life, that can be a helpful way of developing resilience. But there's lots of caveats there. So if you experience too much adversity, you're probably not going to necessarily develop resilience. You might develop strength, right? So you might develop the capacity to get through things, to just find a way of surviving. But then you're constantly in survival mode, which is not the same as necessarily being resilient. So that's the one caveat. There's a kind of sweet spot, I guess, for how much adversity a child can be exposed to and how much hardship they can be exposed to, which is really going to allow them to be authentically resilient. And then when does it become detrimental? And no hardship, it was possible to give a child this. It's not really, because there's too many factors there. But if it was possible to kind of protect a child completely from the world, that would also inhibit their ability to be resilient, because they wouldn't realize, that the nature of life is baked in with hardship and difficulty. And the status quo, this is quite a helpful way of thinking about life. The status quo is hardship. So the status quo is we don't get what we want. And then when we are able to be successful and have achievements, that's bucking the norm, as opposed to how we often think about it is, everything should be given to us. And when we don't get what we want, then life feels unfair, as opposed to saying, well, maybe life is unfair to begin with, and then we get to say, okay, well, how do I kind of impact that? How do I have an effect on that? And that's a certain kind of growth mindset as well. So yeah, hardship is all good, and then it's also about the way that we're parented and supported through hardship, right? So if we're just left to deal with it on our own, that again might not necessarily create the foundations for healthy resilience. It might just create sense for pushing down our feelings. My feelings don't matter. I can just get through this and pretend it's all fine, even though it's not. As opposed to an attentive and emotionally available parent we will then encourage in us the validity of the feelings that we have and allow us to be present with our feelings, whilst at the same time introducing coping mechanisms that we might use in order to get through that situation. So the environment is going to play a big role. The things we go through in life and how our caregivers respond to that, these are all going to determine our resilience. But despite this, we can further develop our capacity as we become adults. We can learn where our weak spots are. We can learn how to develop them in terms of our resilience. Because the early things we don't control are outside of our control. So the point generally is not avoiding adversity and stress, because again, you can kind of have this mindset that they are part of life. It's about knowing the difference between necessary and unnecessary suffering. So you could have this framework, something along the lines of there is going to be suffering in life, and that is going to be necessary. Necessary suffering means when you love people, you will lose them at some point. In most cases, so the downside of having a really good relationship with your parents is that they will pass away. That's necessary suffering. That's the price of loving. It's the price of having relationships. Going through stress and the pressure that we feel when we're trying to achieve a goal, the sacrifices we make in order to achieve something that's important to us. This is all suffering, but it's necessary suffering. The unnecessary suffering is when we're getting in our own way, when we're introducing toxic elements into our relationships, when we're introducing self-defeating behaviors or thought patterns into our life that are making the necessary suffering of life that much harder. Okay, I hope that distinction makes sense. So it's not about avoiding situations where we fail. That's a very common thing. We kind of keep it safe, and I'm scared of failing, so I'm not even going to go into that space right there. I'm going to stay in my comfort zone. That's one way to have an underdeveloped resilience, capacity for resilience. If we put ourselves in situations where we might fail, where we have where we have a realistic chance of success, but we might fail, that can be a really helpful breeding ground for resilience. If we put ourselves in situations where we fail all the time and there's no chance of success, that can then be quite detrimental to resilience, because you can start to tell us, start to learn the lesson, okay, well, I'm always going to fail, and that can have negative side effects as well. So mental toughness. This is a model, the 4 C's of mental toughness. It's quite a helpful way of thinking about what it means to be mentally tough. And again, I made that distinction earlier about toughness and strength. These are just kind of semantic differences, but it's you can think about it. You can use whatever words you want, but rather the point is to understand that there are differences between different ways of interfacing with the world. And some of them are about denial, and some being honest and being present and being available with ourselves. Okay, so the 4 C's of mental toughness. There's control, really, which is just about responsibility for our own the own aspects of our psychology that are within our control, our thoughts, our feelings, and behavior. It's about ownership and accountability there. It's about the ability to regulate our emotional experiences, regulate our focus and our motivation, and just to have control over the things that are in our control, and really being laser focused on that. That's such an important foundation for dealing with adversity and building resilience generally, is just to be responsible for what we are responsible for, not blaming other people for our own within our responsibility, but also not trying to take responsibility for things that are outside of our responsibility, and all of the stress and hellishness that can come with those dynamics. Challenges as well. So not avoiding failure or situations where we might fail, but embracing difficulty as an opportunity for growth. So this is really hard right now, but just think how much I'm growing through it. If I'd said no to this experience, I would be very comfortable on the couch watching Netflix, but I wouldn't actually be growing. So this mental toughness is about embracing challenges when we find them and showing up in a way that's not necessarily, it's not hard on ourselves, but it can be in compassionate, gently pushing ourselves, or at sometimes maybe firmly pushing ourselves to go to places that perhaps we wouldn't normally go. It's outside of the comfort zone that growth happens, of course. And a commitment, having goals, having values, having a true north, having these things that ground us, these values that we have as we pursue excellence. So there's always a tension between pursuing excellence and being a perfectionist. Perfectionism comes with a whole lot of hidden costs. We never allow to be present and to enjoy our successes because nothing is ever good enough. And we're always striving for the next thing. We're always too hard on ourselves. We're judging ourselves too much. It can be adaptive and functional and help us achieve success, but it comes with a whole lot of hidden costs. Whereas pursuing excellence, showing up in the best way that we can, knowing that sometimes good enough is enough. This is again focusing on what we can control, and it allows us to be present, to celebrate our success, to live in those moments in this world. And then confidence. So competence breeds confidence. We're competent in something, we need to be confident in it. This is this relationship between confidence, belief, assurance, believing in ourselves, to be able to face obstacles with positivity as well. Which as I make this point from time to time, but positivity is not the same as just pretending everything is fine all the time, or never acknowledging the difficulty, or acknowledging the way we're feeling, or acknowledging hardship, or acknowledging hard feelings. It's about being real with ourselves, but not real with negativity. So I can feel the deepest grief in the world. I can feel that feeling of my not being able to breathe because I'm grieving so much. And I can do that. I can have that experience with positivity, which is to say, the narrative is, this hurts like nothing I've ever been through, but I will be okay again. It might not be the same. It might always hurt in some ways, but I'm going to get through the other side of this, and I'm feeling these feelings because this person meant that much. That's grief with positivity, as opposed to grief with this is just going to be. I'm just going to suffer until I'm never going to get better. Bad things always happen to me. Why is my life so hard? Why does this person have it so easy? That's grief with negativity. So if you are wondering, perhaps, and this would be a reasonable thing to wonder about this idea of flexibility, right? And how does that then reconcile itself with consistency and having values, standing up for ourselves, standing up for what we believe? Because sometimes we think about flexibility as just going with the flow, right? And not really standing. You don't stand for anything, you fall for everything. That type of mindset. And I think it's important to reconcile these two things, because that you can have both at the same time. So if I'm saying, well, flexibility is a really important part of resilience, too rigid, we can't be resilient, because we'll crack under the stress. We need to at times change our beliefs. We need to change our mind. We need to change how we think about things. How do you then reconcile that with having values, right? Which are these kind of touchstones of our life as we navigate it, and the things that really matter to us that tend not to change, that then inform how we show up in other things. So how do we reconcile these two things? How can I be flexible but also have my values? This is a really important point. So you have to first of all know what your core values are. So take time to reflect. And when you have gone through that mindful process of identifying what your core values are, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's family, maybe it's living a life that you want to finish, you want to look back on and reflect that it's meaningful. Maybe it's charity, or maybe it's community, maybe it's self-sacrifice. Whatever these values are, just having a very clear sense on. Maybe it's honesty, maybe it's gratitude. Having a clear sense of what these values are, that's the starting point. Because then you can start to align them with longer term goals and principles that you have as well. Different situations are going to need different levels of flexibility, and the idea is not necessarily to change our values, but to change the permissions, the expectations, the belief that we have, that kind of one level above those values. There will be times where we might be forced to reconsider our values. If our behavior is out of line with our values, that can cause all sorts of internal conflicts. It can cause, often it causes cognitive dissonance. We don't really want to think getting drunk every weekend, or living a long lifestyle. My grandkids are so important, yet I'm smoking. These things are in conflict. I'm having a connection issue. Are you guys hearing me okay? Just got a warning there that my connection might be a bit unstable coming through. Seems to be okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So the idea is not necessarily that our values change every day. Yeah, that would be unrealistic. It wouldn't be practical. It wouldn't be possible. But sometimes we have to look back and we either have to change our behavior or we have to say, maybe I've evolved from where I was. Maybe my values are not what they were anymore. Maybe as I've grown into a certain part of my life, my values have changed. And constantly being aware of that and that evolution and checking in with yourself. Yeah, that self-awareness is a really important part um, of being able to know when to be flexible and knowing what are non-negotiables. What are the things that are actually for good reasons I can't compromise on? What can I give up? And once we have a really good sense of what I can't give up, it allows us to give up the things that aren't as important. Um, you know, compromising certain things. And this you kind of see this in conflict relationships as well. Once I'm really clear on the things that I'm clear on, things that are important to me, then I don't have to fight over the small things. I can let those go. And that's about being able to see compromise and common ground. And it's not, all or nothing like absolutes, but just we don't have to abandon our value just because we're being a bit more flexible in a specific situation. We can know, well, this hasn't stopped being important to me. However, in this current situation, it's okay. I'm going to let go of it. Honesty is one of my core values, but yeah, in the situation right now, felt like I needed to say something and I didn't say it. That feels problematic. But I also know there's good reasons why it didn't feel like it was worth the fight. It seemed like it was going to do more damage than not. So I wasn't really living a true expression of one of my core values there. But I also understand that was probably the best choice for me at the time, for example. And then embrace the adaptability of it. So again, flexibility and resilience go hand in hand. So being able to be adaptable and having that adaptable mindset has allowed you to navigate the uncertainty of all the situation. So really leaning into that, but knowing I'm not necessarily giving up on my core values here. There are things that are important to me, things that really even, but there are also things that I'm willing to chase. People that matter to you and people whose opinions matter to you after. Get some sense, some perspective on this tension between flexible and the values that you have. This 360 approach can be really enlightening as well. So circling back, I want to start to wrap it up on this, but these are for those of you, and I do recognize yes, a lot of you coming back who have been attending these webinars throughout the course of the year. For those of you who haven't, these are the things we've been speaking about throughout this webinar series. It kind of leads back into this concept of resilience, the things that are really important for wellness. So the philosophical structures that we have, the way we think about life generally, the way, as I was giving you a few examples earlier about how we think about hardship in life, adversity in life. What do we expect? Is adversity part of the package? Is the exception to the norm? Is life being able to make the hardship worthwhile? Is finding enough meaning and joy in my life that I can deal with the pain when it comes? These are philosophical structures. What is the meaning and purpose of my life? Having these structures provides a lot of support when we're going through the difficult time, because we can find meaning and purpose through the suffering and in the suffering. And this allows for post-traumatic growth as well. And then emotional regulation, adaptive emotional regulation. So being able to regulate our feelings and our psychological states generally in ways that are healthy and help us and aren't unhealthy and get in our way. So the ability to feel feelings that are appropriate, but also to be able to then, kind of circle back with some perspective or some reframing of the situation, the ability to kind of take a step out of it and maybe, challenge the narrative that we have. This allows them to not be overwhelmed by the feelings that we feel when we go into difficulties, but to be able to have some sense of, I can regulate these to a point where they're not causing, all sorts of unnecessary pain to the point that I actually have to avoid them or not feel anything, find avoidant behaviors there. And it's not about, kind of overdoing the cognitive regulation, which is, overthinking everything. Sometimes we just have to be present, have to go through a feeling, and then the full extent of what it means, full depth of that emotional experience. But then we can also come back again to the emotional regulation, which is tools that we have and the way that we have to regulate that. And then the positive psychological techniques, so mindfulness and self-compassion and gratitude. These are really key aspects of resilience. To just be present, to be kind to ourselves, to feel that we're part of common humanity, to not over-identify with negative feelings, to be grateful for what we do have, and to acknowledge what we don't, but to do that with gratitude. These are such important aspects, and that's why they receive so much attention in various places, both in psychological literature, but also sure in places like our mindset as well. So growth versus fixed. We did a webinar on mindset a couple of months back. It was the beginning of the year. Do we believe that we kind of fixed in our own competencies and skills, and so we're afraid of failure, going to be found out? Do we see how our whole skill set and the value that we bring is something that's constantly evolving and opportunities for growth, and so we can kind of lean into situations that are uncomfortable and lean into the situations where we might fail, rate of being found out, the growth mindset. This is really, how do we think about adversity? Do I have to avoid it, run from it, or can I trust myself to stay the course through it? And then, as I mentioned earlier, meaningful social connections. This is such an important part of finding support, getting perspective, on feeling that we matter, feeling that we have significance. And these are kind of deep human needs. It doesn't mean that we have to have a completely full social life. We just have to have certain people in our lives that see us and who we see. And then the foundation of psychology, your psychology and your wellness, is always these three: diet, sleep, exercise. How well are you focusing on these? If any of them is really out of step, you're going to start experiencing challenges in terms of your mental health. You're not going to be at the optimal performance, because they are just so material and relevant to that. And there's a huge amount we can say on that, but I'll just leave it there. These are things we have spoken about. And there will be a webinar towards next year on diet as well. Okay, guys, thank you very much. A couple of minutes early there, but that allows us time for some Q&A or some comments. Any questions or any thoughts or any feedback? Give you guys just a couple of minutes to type those in. I know it might have a bit of a delay, so I'll just pause for a bit and let any comments, questions come through, and try to address them as we go. Okay, so Zane, the recording will be shared. Israel will comment on exactly where you can find it. I think it's normally on the Regent YouTube page, but Israel will just direct you to where you can find it just now. Tababanki, you are saying, can I define resilience as not giving up regardless of what life throws at you? Yeah, I think that is certainly a way that you could define resilience. I guess you could ask, what does it mean to give up? I suppose at times giving up is not always a bad thing. Giving up a bad relationship is actually a good thing. If you're speaking more broadly about not giving up on life, yes, I think that's probably a very good way of defining resilience. And you could say maybe it's also knowing when to give up and knowing when not to give up, so we don't have to kind of lose hope in this whole project of living as it were. But yes, life will throw things at us, so it's about how do we respond to that? How do we take the punches? And sometimes that'll mean getting knocked down. How do we give up again? How do we get up again without giving up? Yeah, I think that's a good description. Thank you for that. Maud, yes, indeed, life can throw lemons. It does. Yeah, these are things that we can grow through as we either dodge them or as we get. I suppose there's the challenge is there's a positive framework for not being surprised when the lemons are being thrown at us, to continue your analogy. So you can kind of say, okay, well, there's nothing surprising about the fact that this is hard right now because life is hard, but that can very quickly become this, or really negative mindset, which is, bad things always can happen. There's a positive way of having that conversation with ourselves, that structure around it. Yeah, life does have hardship, and I know there's going to be hardship coming. So I'm not surprised that this is hard necessarily, but I also know there's more to life, and even through hardship, there's a lot of meaning and beauty that we find, and there's also a lot of meaning and beauty outside the hardship, and that's what makes this suffering all worthwhile. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. You're most welcome. Yeah, it is really relevant to have these tools, I think. The Sego, thank you. Great. I'm glad there are light bulbs in terms of necessary and unnecessary suffering. That's great. Noctula, how does resilience in finding balance in stressful times, especially when being employed and family dependent, to being unemployed and constantly getting rejection stuff? Yeah, tough one. I mean, there's a lot there. A lot there. I wouldn't want to, kind of give it an exhaustive answer on that. It's pretty on situation. But yeah, I mean, the job search is one that is filled with rejection, isn't it? One's challenge is not to take that rejection personally, and that's a really important aspect of emotional intelligence, not to take to take the lessons that are there, but not to personalize us. So failing doesn't make us failure necessarily. And if you really believe in what you have, then you have to be able to go through the experience of multiple failures. That's one lesson that people take again over and over. Successful people, nothing special about them except for their ability to not give up. They've been through difficulties, to kind of persevere with going to the difficult places. If you believe enough in yourself to be able to kind of pick yourself back up again, put yourself in that position again, that is one of the really key ingredients to success. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Okay, guys, thank you very much. We will be meeting again next month. We will go through the next topic in this webinar series, and I look forward to connecting with you guys there. Hope that this was helpful, and yeah, until we chat again, keep on working on those skills, working on those resilience skills, and be kind to yourself along the way. Okay, enjoy the rest of your week. I will catch up with you guys again in September. We'll